Today's gospel reading comes from the 18th chapter of John. Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So, are you a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I'm a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" It's the word of the Lord. You may be seated. Grace, peace, and an open ear be with you all in the name of our Redeemer and Guide, Jesus Christ. Amen. What is truth? That's Pilate's answer when Jesus says, "For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify the truth." On the surface, Pilate was the most powerful man in all Jerusalem, in all of Palestine, really. He's the governor, and he has the authority and the might of the Roman Empire behind him. He has the power of life and death over not just Jesus, but really everybody around him. But as is typical in John's gospel, Jesus is really the one in control in this narrative, and it is Pilate who kind of feels like the one on trial. Because Pilate finds himself a pawn, caught up in this situation where he really doesn't have any control. In the portions of this story that fall outside of today's reading, we see it even more clearly. Because amidst all of the trappings of authority that Pilate has, he's the one who still is running back and forth between Jesus inside and the Jewish authorities who are waiting outside. The Jewish authorities, they don't want to defile themselves by entering into the world of Caesar, and Pilate just ends up kowtowing to their religious empire. As this scene continues to unfold, it's very clear that Pilate gets more and more agitated, more frightened, and he starts to see that he's kind of trapped and he's got no way out of this. He's a prisoner of both his empire and the empire of the Jewish establishment. So much for all of his power. Interesting to me is that in this trial, Jesus actually seeks to engage Pilate and draw him into his new understanding. At his own trial, Jesus is ministering to Pilate. He invites him to grow, to escape these things that have trapped him, and he invites him to step into the truth. Unfortunately, Pilate just can't bring himself to do it. It would have cost Pilate just too much to accept Jesus' invitation. Pilate could not escape the empire that he was a part of. It's clear that Pilate felt drawn to Jesus' message, but as a politician, he had power and privilege, and in the end, he just couldn't give it up. Could you? Could I? I don't know. And I'm about to say something a little out of character for me because I am not the kind of person who's generally sympathetic towards politicians. But I would venture to guess that a lot of modern-day politicians can appreciate Pilate's predicament. I think most of us are aware about how a lot of times you'll see politicians feeling trapped. They're unable to really say what they think or believe. I mean, let's look at all of these increasingly absurd statements about South American refugees, undocumented immigrants, violence at our south border, all of which are very overblown or at best half-truths. Or look at this impossible tightrope that they try and often fail to walk. We're talking about the incalculable loss of life in the West Bank and in Gaza and the genocide that is happening right before our eyes, or our non-involvement in system support in Ukraine. Are these all really heartfelt, well-reasoned responses, or is it, at the end of the day, nothing but political pandering? Are they just saying the things that they think they have to say? Are they trapped, just like Pilate? A lot of people, me included, regularly trash politicians because of the way that they tend to dance around and spin the truth. But for their livelihood, there would be a price to pay if they didn't spin. And I want to be clear, I am not talking about one side or the other. All high-level national politicians discover at some point that much of their control and much of their power is just an illusion. See, they're trapped in their empire. There are simply things that they feel they have to say or that they must do. Likewise, there are a lot of things they can't say or they can't do, whether it's the truth or not. There's no real need, though, for me to just pick on politicians here. Most of us spend a fair amount of time living behind masks and living in a persona. Perhaps we're not as blatant about ours as Pilate or other politicians are, but I certainly have ways in which I find myself trapped, just like Pilate. When I don't really want to live into the ways that step out of my own fears. As a, say, soon-to-be pastor, there is a certain level of assumption and expectation about who I am and how I'm going to act. And some of those are assumptions that I have acquired over the years and that I have put on myself. But some of them are assumptions and expectations that other people have put on me. Often I find myself caught in between these assumptions and these expectations, whether it reflects the real me or not. Because often, to be very frank, I'm just afraid. Because sometimes I feel unable to step into the truth. Now today is Christ the King Sunday. We who are Christians, this is our day where we proclaim boldly and loudly that Christ alone rules our lives and that every other allegiance, every other loyalty is secondary to following Jesus. See, Jesus here is the new kingdom. Jesus is the new empire. Or at least that's what we say out loud, and maybe what we tell ourselves. In almost all congregations, there are people who assume and expect that the pastor and your vicar, that we have incredible faith, and we have spirituality all figured out. So do I dare tell you that at times, even I have struggles with faith? That there are times when I'm longing for God's voice, for a whisper of the Spirit, and I hear nothing? When I first began at seminary, to be perfectly honest, I was terrified that I had made a massive mistake. What if I wasn't a good fit? I was leaving an old career, and I wasn't exactly thrilled with it, but wouldn't it have been safer to just keep wearing that mask? I can tell you those first few weeks at seminary, I have never felt the weight of imposter syndrome more in my entire life. But like Pilate, it was too risky for me to say these things out loud. But the truth does have its way of sneaking out. In the beginning of this past, I had all of these attempts to project strength and a certainty, and I'm sure it oftentimes left me looking and acting as foolishly as Pontious Pilate does in today's reading. Just like Pilate, I was trapped by my own expectations and by my own fear. But thankfully, Jesus invited me repeatedly to step outside and step into the truth, and he encouraged me to just quit pretending. And I eventually got there, just a little bit. And I keep talking about myself, but you know what? It's not just faith leaders, and it's not just politicians. It's all of us. Everyone at times finds ourselves trapped. Trapped by fear and by worry, by assumptions. We find that this power and this control that we think we have, well, it's nothing but an illusion. Just like Jesus does with Pilate, Jesus keeps asking us, where did you get all of this? Don't you want to step into the truth? Why won't you let me help you? The problem with letting him help us is that the truth he's talking about, oh, it's scary. Because sometimes that truth tells us things like the way we do church or the way we live our lives or the things that we think are going to make us happy are wrong. Because for us, just as like Pilate, the truth can be a frightening thing. But Jesus keeps telling us, keeps insisting, for this reason I was born, for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. See, here Jesus is embodying the words of Esther that Pastor Allie talked about last week. When in Esther 4:14 the question is asked, and who knows whether you haven't come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Jesus was born for such a time as this. And Jesus' invitation into the truth, that is born out of God's grace and out of God's love. And that is the new kingdom. That is the empire. Now, the reality is, Jesus says a lot of things that just scare me. Because Jesus questions my love for money and of things. And Jesus is forever hanging out with the wrong kind of unimpressive people. People from the margins. People who don't really fit in polite society. People who, frankly, would not feel at all comfortable in a nice, respectable church congregation like we have here. Jesus tells me to risk myself, to risk my money and my things for those people. Jesus even says I'm supposed to love my enemies, whoever they might be. But it worries me because I want to be a success. I want to be upstanding and respectable, which is a big masked way of saying I want to be in control. So maybe it would be an okay idea to kind of keep Jesus at arm's length a little bit. Maybe I should keep wearing that mask. The thing about masks, they really don't fool anyone, at least not for very long. My own attempts to be the religious expert with all the answers, they really just make my own shortcomings look all the more obvious. We like to imagine that if we dress up nice and act all respectable and we have all the right kind of paraments, and we have a liberated and enlightened understanding of the Bible, that's going to make God stand up and notice that we've really got it all together. But when we do that, we are fooling ourselves every bit as much as Pilate was. Because the truth is, the times that I have felt the most free and the most at peace, well, they're the times that I've quit pretending and I've just let Jesus be my guide. See, Jesus, he leads us into some real scary places, but it turns out he knows where he's leading us a whole lot better than we usually do. Jesus said that everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. I'm trying, Jesus. I'm trying.